Some families develop a talent for turning humiliation into tradition. They disguise sharp words as jokes and call their harshness honesty. Around the dinner table, they convince themselves that affection and cruelty can occupy the same seat. I knew that kind of family intimately. Every holiday gathering at my parents' house unfolded like a play everyone had rehearsed 100 times before. The details never changed. My Aunt Diane arrived late, carrying excuses before she even carried dessert through the front door. My cousin Eric found a way to steer every conversation toward his latest career achievement. My mother floated endlessly between stove and table, making sure everyone else was comfortable while no one noticed how exhausted she looked. And my father. He entertained. He loved an audience. He knew exactly how long to pause before a punchline, how to tilt his head just enough to invite laughter. The room rewarded him for it every single time. Usually his targets were harmless enough: neighbors, politicians, strangers none of us knew. But every so often, when some invisible bitterness surfaced, he chose someone closer. He chose me. That Thanksgiving, I was 31. For nearly 4 years, I'd poured everything I had into building a business from the ground up. It wasn't flashy. There were no magazine covers or luxury vacations posted online. Most people wouldn't have looked twice at what I was doing. But it was working. The income had become steady. The growth was real. I had finally stopped measuring success by whether other people applauded it. Dinner hadn't even begun when my father stood with his wineglass. The room instinctively quieted. He smiled. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced. Everyone looked up. "Here's to our family's biggest dreamer," he glanced toward me before finishing. "The one who'll probably never make anything of himself." Laughter rippled around the table. Some laughed immediately. Others hesitated before joining in. My mother lowered her eyes. I sat frozen. Then my father looked directly at me, his expression soft enough to almost resemble kindness. "You know," he said, "if you disappeared tomorrow, I think half of us would throw a party." The laughter returned. Hotter this time. Louder. I couldn't hear my own breathing. Something inside me shifted. I pushed my chair back. I wasn't sure whether I planned to leave or say something I'd regret. I only knew I couldn't stay seated another second. Before I could take a step, another sound interrupted the room. A fork touching porcelain. Tiny. Deliberate. Yet somehow impossible to ignore. My grandfather cleared his throat. Walter had turned 81 earlier that year. Age had gradually pushed him toward the edges of family gatherings. People spoke around him rather than to him. They assumed his silence meant disengagement. They mistook quiet for absence. He set his napkin beside his plate. Then he said my name. Not loudly. Just firmly. The way he'd said it since I was a child. As though it carried weight. He turned toward my father. "Richard," he asked calmly, "do you happen to know who owns the office building your accountant works from?" My father frowned. "What?" "The one on Claremont Avenue," Walter continued. "4th floor." Blank stares answered him. "No," my father finally said. "Why?" Walter regarded him for a moment. Then he replied, "Your son bought that property over a year ago." Silence. He continued. "Actually, he purchased 2 additional buildings on the same block shortly afterward." Nobody moved. Nobody laughed. The air itself seemed to stop. Eric suddenly found his phone fascinating. My aunt reached for her drink without taking her eyes off me. My mother looked up from her plate for the first time all evening. My father stared across the table. "What?" he repeated. Walter picked up his fork again. "I assumed you knew," he said simply. There was no dramatic explosion. No shouting. No one stormed out. Reality rarely grants those cinematic moments. Instead, something stranger happened. People recalculated. Every assumption they'd made about me quietly rearranged itself behind their eyes. I didn't defend myself. I didn't list accomplishments. I didn't explain how many sleepless nights had gone into building what I'd built. The truth didn't require a presentation. Dinner resumed. Conversation stumbled awkwardly toward safer subjects. I passed dishes, refilled glasses, answered questions about weather, traffic, and holiday plans. My father never addressed me again that night. Hours later, bundled in coats and scarves, relatives drifted toward their cars beneath the cold November sky. I had just unlocked mine when I heard my grandfather's cane tapping against the pavement. He stopped beside me. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Finally, he said, "You never needed their approval." I looked at him. "You also didn't have to prove anything tonight," he added. I exhaled slowly. "I know." He squeezed my shoulder. It was the same reassuring gesture he'd used decades earlier after scraped knees, broken confidence, and childhood disappointments. "I've always known who you were," he said. Nothing more. No apology for my father. No attempt to repair what had broken long before that evening. Just recognition. He turned and made his slow way back toward the house, glowing with warm holiday light. I sat behind the steering wheel without starting the engine. Outside, the cold crept across the windshield in thin layers of fog. I thought about the buildings I'd bought, the ordinary brick structures people passed every day without noticing. I thought about how many years I'd spent chasing validation from people determined not to give it. And I realized something. Success had never been the revenge. Being seen was. Not by everyone. Not by the people who needed me small to feel important. Just by one person who had watched quietly from the edges of the room and understood my worth long before anyone else cared to ask. Walter was 81 years old. He had known all along. And somehow, that was enough.